The idea that major governments have covered up the true nature of the UFO phenomena for more than a half a century through unprecedented secrecy, deception, and intimidation strikes many reasonable citizens as ridiculous. Yet a new book by our next speaker, Ryan Wood, Majic Eyes Only, Earth Encounters with Extraterrestrial Technology, provides a wealth of crash UFO evidence, including declassified and leaked government documents and credible eyewitness testimony, which supports the uncomfortable truth of this ridiculous notion. Majic Eyes Only is a landmark synthesis and review of every credible UFO crash retrieval event uncovered worldwide to date, assembling data from his own research and numerous other investigators, including crash retrieval pioneer Leonard Stringfield. The author presents 74 UFO crashes from 1897 to the present day. All of this is supported by compelling evidence in the form of official documents, eyewitnesses, and in some cases, physical evidence. The cases vary in quality, depth, and sophistication, but the audience, you guys today, will come away with new insight and novel information and a clear perspective that there are many other UFO crash retrievals before Roswell. The talk provides a framework for crash incident authenticity, illustrated with specific examples. You will conclude today, after Ryan's talk, that 1, UFOs have crashed on Earth. 2, governments have recovered and exploited these alien technology gifts. And number 3, most disturbing to a democratic, free society, the alien secret is more important than constitutional or individual rights. Please let me not waste any more time and welcome Ryan Wood to the stage.
Thanks, John. That was wonderful. I found a couple more people with that approached me during the conference, and now my list has grown from 74 to 77, but that's really not true. I have a few more crash events in a folder at my house, so by the time I'm done in another year or so and have published the next edition of the book, I believe I'm going to crest over 100 different crash retrieval events, granted in varying quality and sophistication, throughout from 1897 to present. So I'm excited that we have a lot of data and a lot of proof. You can throw out any particular case you want, from Roswell to Kecksburg to any of them, and any reasonable person will come back with a vote of confidence that yes, they've crashed, yes, they're extraterrestrial, and that the government has paid a tremendous amount of attention to this phenomenon and tried to exploit it. So this has been my focus for the past year or so, developing this framework and this meta-research to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that we've got a lot of crashes and a lot of hardware to deal with in the secret vaults of the US and other world governments. I titled my talk, Big Proof, Examination of UFO Crash Cases, and I'll do a little bit of that, but I'll try to give you some perspective on all of it, because it's more than just crash cases. And this is what I wanted to talk about. Some quick, famous statements by public people about crashes, a quick review of the Majestic documents. Linda Howe, who was here last night, gave an outstanding presentation about the IPU and the first annual report and many of the Majestic documents, and gave specific examples. I'll give you sort of a higher level sourcing and authenticity quick discussion about that, but I have those documents, they're all in a book that we'll sell in the back. And talk about original MJ-12 documents as well, just briefly. I did that a couple of years ago when I did a long intensive on the burned memo and the Bowen manuscript. How many people were here 2 years ago for that? Oh, about 6, 8, so that's good. That's good. I've cut that down so it's not quite as intensive. And then talk about the book specifically, what's in it, the Special Operations Manual, which is so critical. If there's one thing you want to take away, is that manual is totally real and 100% authentic, and it is the linchpin of crash retrievals by its very name. Extraterrestrial entities, technology, recovery, and disposal. Recovery and disposal. That's the this is about. We're about crashes here, and that's recovering and disposing of crashed hardware. Some of the crash cases, some leaked photos that people have never seen. They're published in the book as well, and a little bit about the 4th annual Crash Retrieval Conference, which is coming up in Las Vegas, November 10th through 12th at the Tuscany. Occasionally, I think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. We've probably all seen that, but it's important to remind yourself that many of our political leaders have thought about this problem and keep thinking about this problem, because it's one of the most perplexing enigmas that we have as a society. Hoover, we must insist upon full access to disks recovered. For instance, in the LA case, the Army grabbed it and would not let us have it for cursory examination. This is, of course, in his own handwriting on a document. It's not clear what LA stands for, whether it's Los Alamos or Los Angeles or Louisiana, but I'm favoring Los Angeles. Barry Goldwater. I made an effort to find out what was in the building at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base where the information was stored and has been collected by the Air Force, and I was understandably denied his request. This is all still classified above top secret. He made this request to Benjamin Chidlaw, and Benjamin Chidlaw, head of the Strategic Air Command, denied the request. Hillenkoetter. It's time for the truth to be brought out. Behind the scenes, high-ranking Air Force officers are soberly concerned about UFOs, but through official secrecy and ridicule, which continues to this day, citizens are led to believe that unknown flying objects are nonsense. To hide the facts, the Air Force has silenced its own personnel, and it continues to silence them, as well as Navy and Army and so forth. It's all compartmentalized and all very top secret. Douglas MacArthur, because the developments of science, all countries of the earth will have to unite to survive, to make a common front against the attack by people of other planets. The politics of the future will be cosmic or interplanetary. George, or Douglas, is the original exopolitics guy. He saw this entire process unfolding long before Michael Salla and Steve Bassett and everybody was jumping on it and started the exopolitical movement, which I think is wonderful. It needs to be done. Most people haven't heard of Arthur Bernard Newman, but he was a fiction writer, and he wrote this book, The Flying Saucer, in 1948. 1948. This was just after, this is sort of the first mention. With a shrill scream and blinding yellow flash, the rockets thudded into Earth. The awe-stricken peoples of the Earth awaited breathlessly as the weird hieroglyphics from the bowels of the rockets were deciphered. The message read, "The Earth will be annihilated unless it forfeits its gold." For once, the nations were shocked into unity. And I wonder, you know, if you read Zecharia Sitchin's work, he certainly says that we're sort of a drone species that's been mining gold for the aliens for a long time. So I don't know how true that is, but it's interesting speculation. And deciphered, many of the crashes have alien writing associated with them. We heard Jesse Marcel talk earlier on Friday night about that, and there's the Cape Girardeau case where Charlotte Mann talks about it as well. Editor Mitchell, the evidence points to the fact that Roswell was a real incident, that indeed an alien craft did crash, and the material was recovered from the crash site. Brigadier General Arthur Exon. We heard the material was coming to Wright Field. It was brought to our material evaluation labs. I don't know how it arrived, but the boys who tested it said it was very unusual. And this is the highest ranking person ever to talk about it. Another brigadier general, I don't know who has the higher rank. They're both brigadier generals. You have to look that up. After the plane from Roswell material arrived, I asked the base commander to personally transport the material to Major General McCullen in Washington. He's been tagged as part of the MJ-12 team in documents and pictures as well. The weather balloon explanation was a cover story to divert attention of the press. So, more admission of what was obvious now. Corso, I had the evidence that it did crash. I ask you this, were you there with me? Do you have the clearances? Do you have the answers to these questions? They simply criticized with no evidence. And to this day, those that indict Corso, I think are short-sighted. Now, he may have misremembered things, and it's not perfect, but he was 80 years old when he did it. So I don't expect perfect recall. June Crane, very interesting woman, Wright-Patterson's secretary from 42 to 52. They frequently saw them, UFOs, and then told me, I'm positive there were at least 3 crashes by 52. And this comes about from her firsthand experience of handling the material that people would bring in and talk to her about. So now we'll give a little Majestic documents overview, where they came from, what they are, what's involved, how many pages. These are the sources. Everybody talks about sources. Where'd you get this stuff from? And these are some of the original documents. The teletype in 81, Aquarius briefing notes, allegedly faked or problematic from Moore. I sort of ignore those first 2 documents because there's too much baggage with them, and they don't say anything. There's nothing really verifiable. The Eisenhower briefing document that Stan Friedman has so carefully and rigorously authenticated, I'm sure he would stand here and say, I'm 99.9% confident that it's true and authentic, and in that, of course, you have validation of Roswell, and you have validation of the El Indio Guerrero 1950 crash case. The Cutler-Twining memo, which is an original memo that was in the National Archives. It doesn't say what NSC MJ-12 is, National Security Council MJ-12, but it's sort of original, it's interesting. We have a variety of mailbox drops from Thomas Cantwheel to Tim Cooper. Sometimes they're clearly identifiable from Thomas Cantwheel, and other times they're just mailings with return addresses at the Freedom of Information Office at the National Security Agency or the CIA and so forth. We have Don Berliner, who received the Special Operations Manual in 1994, right after the last MJ-12 person died, the original list, as undeveloped film. We'll talk more about that. We have the crash dummies sort of debunking that June Crane provides in her firsthand testimony given to James Clarkson, a police detective in Gig Harbor, Washington. And then we have a couple of other Freedom of Information Act receipts to Tim Cooper, one mentioning MJ-12. So those are some of the sources. These are the various different documents. Virtually all of them are in this Majestic Documents book that was discussed in some detail by Linda Howe. The Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit summary, which Linda talks about with the animal parts inside and the field surgeons discovering bodies that have had exploratory surgery. The first annual report, which is in this document where they talk about control of the press and the policy of denial and the relationships with with controlling the press and the importance of that. And then there's some other documents here that aren't in the book, that the Special Operations Manual, which will cover the Bowen manuscript, which was received in or written in 54. It wasn't received in 54. And then various other JFK memos that have been corroborated, or I've corroborated them with other National Archive material. And then the Byrne memo, which was circa 1960, which we'll show a little bit about. So those are some of the leaked documents, some 3,500 pages of material. And this is the book that I showed you earlier. There's some original documents too. Many of the critics say, oh, you got his photocopies. Anybody can fake that. Well, it's very difficult to fake original material when you have that. So some of the original documents, the manuscript on the Encyclopedia of Flying Saucers by Vernon Bowen, the Byrne memo, there's a couple other photographs and so forth, some of which you'll see later and they're in my book. But the big bulk of the data is in the Bowen manuscript and the Byrne memo and some of these photographic negatives. Forensically, you read the material and you walk away with, oh my God, this is so stunning, it's so arresting, it's so uncomfortable, that you have to ask yourself, how do I know it's real? And the discussion degrades into not what the document says, which Linda Howe did so well last night, describing what's in the documents, but to how do I know this is real? How do I know that I can believe it? And this is some of the things that my father and I have worked on, becoming question document examiners and looking at the provenance, where things come from, looking at the paper and ink analysis and the content analysis, and looking for Zingers, obscure rare facts that provide credibility. And well, if you tried to fake it, what would you have to do? If you tried to fake the Special Operations Manual, you'd have to be using Quark Express version 1 in 1993 that didn't have ligatures, and just on, and the level of challenge associated with it all. And you quickly conclude that faking by an individual in the UFO community, or even a group of individuals in the UFO community, is beyond the scope of reasonableness. The probability is very, very small. It's not beyond the skill set of the KGB or MI6 or the CIA, but it's clearly beyond the scope of dedicated wackos. So I've used spec and forensic laboratories to do a variety of work. They're a typical CSI, crime scene investigative lab house. They do all sorts of forgery and alterations and typing and liquid chromatography and mass spectroscopy of inks and papers, and they do trace analysis. They worked on the B'nai Ramsey case, and it's a typical sort of $300 an hour place that will give you a really credible report. The first sort of major trove that Tim Cooper got that's an original document is this Bowen book. And my father, I keep prodding him gently to, let's publish it, let's publish it. And for those that have fathers, I'm sure we all do, we keep after them to do things occasionally, and it slowly gets done. But we're moving along, and hopefully in another 6 months we'll actually have this very well-written book about an Encyclopedia of Flying Saucers, a history of flying saucers from 45 to 55 done. And out there, people can read it. It's very well written. It may turn out to be one of the best written UFO books ever, as far as the quality of English and clarity. So that's the interesting part. There's also all sorts of stamps on it that make it fascinating. This is sort of the cover page, and then the highest classification for this document is top secret magic, or confirmation that top secret magic is the relevant word. No foreign dissemination for U.S. eyes only, exempt from declassification or RADA, special handling required. So we have an original document with original ink that I know that it's old and special, and the watermark's old, etc., that confirms top secret magic. That's sort of the bottom line, besides being an interesting read. There's all sorts of chapters here about the heart of the mystery and Charles Fort and the evidence and sightings. The whole chapter on the Air Force, U.S. Air Force, and flying saucers was the part that was stamped top secret magic. The rest of it was stamped confidential. But the Air Force was, I guess, freaked out or concerned. He had sent it to some of his buddies in the military for their review and approval, and ultimately it got into the system in the early or late 50s and didn't come out of the system until 1999. So, and then no cover letter, no declassification letter, it was just an anonymous mailing. There's some handwritten annotations. This was written in '54. Today it needs to be updated or revised. Today it reads like ancient history. And then Vannevar Bush's distinctive initials right there. So we know that Van Bush read it. And we look at every, pen mark and pencil mark and who wrote it and how old's the ink and all that sort of stuff. So we know this is a 77 ballpoint ink. So somebody looked at it in 77, written in the late 50s, written in 54, but got into the system in the late 50s. And then people are still making notes about it in 77. It mentions Project Moondust. How many people have heard of Moondust? Half. So that's good. Moondust is the sort of recovery arm of the government to pick up primarily space junk, but every once in a while they have to pick up ET stuff. And that's where it gets interesting, but several of the Moondust personnel have mentioned coming across alien hardware. So my conclusions about this Bowen book is that you got a top flight book. It shows huge cracks in the ability of the PSYOP people to control the public exposure to flying saucers in '54. If the book had gotten traction, a lot of newspaper investigative journalists might have just kept digging and more witnesses and might have exposed more crashes and things like that. And that's why I believe they clamped down on it and didn't pursue it. And it confirms magic and moondust. So now to the book, Majic Eyes Only. And it's a little distorted there because I've made it stretch across the screen, but this is the book, 330 pages, hardback, indexed, referenced, all the chapters of consequence, the Kecksburg and Roswell and Shag Harbor have all been reviewed and approved by the leading investigator, because I'm not the primary investigator on all these crashes. Stan Friedman or Stan Gordon or Linda Howe or many others are doing the cutting edge work, Scott Ramsey, in a particular crash. And it's, I just wrote the synopsis and then dealt with the bookends and some of the other crashes that are under investigated. And it took about 9 months from start to finish, 2 months of which was extremely painful. So for those ever thinking about writing a book, you need to think about that. The preface was written by a friend of mine, John Hale, and he poses these 3 key questions. Do you think human science is the highest possible in the universe? We all instinctively know, my God, no. I mean, I can't wait till I see the new Pentium chip from Intel, 2 years from now. Or it's not even a Pentium chip, it's something else now. Multiple core processors, they've gone to parallel processing. Do you think trillions of ancient stars can grow no civilization with the cleverness and desire to launch voyages of discovery, acquisition, and sometimes error? And we all know that, of course they can. I mean, we're trying to do it ourselves. I don't know how many times the space shuttle or the Apollo or et cetera has gotten into trouble and screwed up. Now, you would think they keep getting better and better at it. But even cars aren't reliable. ballpoint pens still break. You know, the more complex things get, the more likely you have problems. And then, do you think governments tell the truth all the time to allow such truths to loosen their grip on authority? And instinctively we all know, no, they don't tell the truth. You can barely tell the truth to your wife all the time, you know, let alone all this, the government and citizens. And the foreword is written by Jim Mars, which was very thoughtful of him. You know, many questions remain in the UFO controversy. Scientists ask how interstellar pilots can survive a trip of 100 years, while cutting-edge physicists offer speculation on deep space wormholes and the use of zero-point energy. For now, we could do no better than to study Majic Eyes Only and read the accounts of UFO crash retrievals and ponder what reality that includes a diverse intelligence life outside our planet might mean for us and future generations. Well, there's lots of other quotes, too, on my website, and you'll see them later. But I'm preaching to the choir. You know this stuff. You already have internalized it. You believe. Well, belief's a rotten word. You probably have data and evidence that support this. So the quick overview is there's 74 crash incidents discussed. They vary in investigation quality, sophistication, and what I did is created an authenticity meter, which you can use at the front of the chapter. You know, you may read one paragraph and the needle's in the middle. I modeled it after mutual fund stock risk meters. And so, you know, you get the high risk and the high needle, that it's all totally authentic, and then the low risk, low authenticity. So, and then we talk about the sources, the Majestic documents a little bit in the introduction, and there's some reprinted. The IPU document is reprinted in the back, as well as the Special Operations Manual. And a whole chapter on SETI and its silly effort to investigate, as Stan Friedman so eloquently continues to proffer. And I just ripped them a giant new world for 25 pages. And I would love to see somebody take it the next step and write a whole book of why SETI is so stupid. And this is the backstop that the media uses to not deal with us and not deal with the hard evidence. Is that, well, how can these guys searching for extraterrestrial technology spend hundreds of millions of dollars and have credible scientists working for them if all this stuff is real? And until you can sort of squash that and really carve it up and slice it and give it back to them, we're going to be stuck for a while. And this is one of the strategic problems in media acceptance, is getting rid of SETI. And it's just sort of my candid perspective. Now, I'm not the first person to do crash retrievals or look at crash retrievals. I mean, the pioneering work was done by Leonard Stringfield, who compiled a lot of this material, and I've reviewed it all and took the best stuff from his material. But he's a very interesting guy, photographic memory, memorized the dictionary, and was a journalist in Air Force intelligence, and has had a lot of connections back then. And I'm reminded of, I never met the man, but my father did, and it was at some MUFON conference probably in the 70s, and my dad came over and said, Len, how many crashes do you think, if you were to give me the 50-50 number, how many crashes do we have? And I think he said 4 or 5. And when my dad related that story, he concluded that, Len was being conservative. It was probably more like 10 or 15 then. And now we got 74, 84, 85, if you get the ones that are in my filing, and I keep working on them. So there's a lot, and there's a lot of evidence. People ask, why do they crash? How can they crash? Linda Howe mentioned it last night. They tried to shoot him down. And they shot him down for a while until the ETs got pissed and started shooting our stuff down. And then we don't do that as much. Or we do it more delicately. Or we do it over somebody else's airspace. Blame somebody else, you know. So their disposable drones is another very, you know, these things don't have to have creatures on them. And then who's to say that the creature is really a sentient, soul-based being? You know, it could be just a disposable biological robot. That's my favorite. I think grays are just disposable biological robots. Or simply a combination of a brain in a jar and some technology driving this beat-up spacecraft jalopy across the universe that did its thing, and, well, you know, here's a planet, I'll just park here, and crashes. You know, they may have some standing orders, you know, when in doubt, let's not drift in space, let's put it on some planet, so at least they get a sense that we're here. Early radar could interfere, thunderstorms are powerful. There's all these different scenarios as to why they crash, or some people say we're being deliberately seeded to think about this. So these are some of the key elements in this authenticity matrix that I created. These are just the weighting factors. So you get a weighting factor, and then you get a score for each of these elements, and that creates a total, and then you get stuck into one of the 5 categories from low to high. So witnesses have about 3. Multiply. I sort of modeled it mentally after, you know, what would a court of law accept? So witness testimony is important, but it's not the end-all, be-all. Sources are very important because that adds a lot, so I give it a very high weighting. Zingers, obscure, rare facts that are verifiable, that are just extremely odd, I'll give it 4. Content, people misremember it and so forth, I only give it a 2. Chronology is everything in the right time and place, just a 2. And then no anachronisms, you know, it's fake because X, and then you have to deal with X. And if there are anachronisms, there's problems. If there's none, then you're in good shape. And then forensics, naturally DNA and paper and ink and all that stuff, the court of law would love that, and you get good convictions when you can have physical evidence in that process. So a high level of authenticity, every crash has a rating. This means that virtually all the evidence, all available investigative channels and ideas have been pursued, and at each test, the case and document has been shown to be authentic or nearly problem-free. At this level, multiple witnesses are present that have seen the crash or aftermath or read a document in an official capacity, have signed or will sign an affidavit to the effect. Physical evidence is available, for example, rocks to test, scarred trees, photographs, direct materials, forensic tests of paper imp, obscure contact, handwriting, typography, fonts are all correct. All indicate the highest level of authenticity. And at least several researchers are in substantial agreement over years. So this is a pretty high hurdle to reach. You know, you can only think of a few cases like this, and we'll talk about that. And in the book, I detail each one, but I'll give you the high, the middle, and the low, just for simple. The medium authenticity, which is sort of the starting point, is a starting point for UFO crash retrieval cases or leaked documents. In essence, these cases are under-researched, and that's what I've discovered in writing the book, is that there's many cases that are just begging for people to spend their time, their money, their effort to advance them, to push them one way or the other, push the needle towards fake or push it towards authenticity. They have both positive and negative signs, and you know, it'll take a lot more work to push the needle one way or the other and get a better understanding. This is where things start out provided they just aren't prosaic explanations like meteors and stuff like that. And a low level, which is also a very difficult place to get to. It's very difficult to get very high and very difficult to get very low. A low level means significant, irresolvable anachronism identified, cast doubt on the entire case or document. Virtually all investigative avenues, That means that you've looked at everything you can look at. Historical area photography, multiple witnesses, ground analysis. You have to do potentially as much work to show that it's junk as it's real. And no sign of internal consistency. Witnesses' stories don't match or differ in direct evidence. A credible motive for faking a document or hoaxing the event has been identified along with likely perpetrators. And we don't have any cases that are really, like this. So the quick summary is 5 out of 74 in the high category: Aurora, 1897, Roswell, Kecksburg, Shag Harbor, Braxton County. And then medium high, 14 out of 74. And then 54 out of 74, the bulk are under investigated. I'll show a few of those under investigated examples later in the talk. And then only one, and actually after reviewing it, I've concluded that I'm going to move it up. It's really should be in a neutral situation at the recommendation of Rich Dolan and some others that have done more investigation about it. So, as I mentioned, 3 crashes I sort of thrown out as meteors. Several more crashes need to be added to the next edition. There's 8 events before 1947, 13 events, 8 events before 47, 13 events before Roswell, 10 events in New Mexico, 4 with parts or wreckage that are linked. There are 6 people with pieces of wreckage right now, but not all of them are clearly linked to a particular crash. I might mention that today is a very special day. Does anybody know why? It's Sunday. Well, it's July 16th, 5:29 a.m. Mountain Standard Time this morning in 1943. The first atomic bomb was blown up or set off. And that particular event rocked the universe and sent the ETs a-coming by the droves. If somebody writes the history of our planet in the future, this is going to be, maybe it's the Independence Day. We could start a movement, start hanging flags of the earth on July 16th. But this is a very important day in our future galactic history. Will be the day that we lit off an atomic bomb. Because everybody woke up and paid attention to emerging planet Earth. We have a cell phone? Yes. Okay. The Special Operations Manual is quickly next. How am I doing in time? 3:12. This is a quick picture. As I mentioned, I'm 99% confident that this is true and authentic. And I'll tell you a little bit why. All the skeptics' arguments and anachronisms that have been raised have all been dealt with. And they're dealt with in my book in complete detail. The group of 5 that wrote a paper saying, it's false because, have all been dealt with. So there's no reason to believe that this is not totally true and authentic. We haven't had any problems that haven't been dealt with. This is the box that it came in, mailed from the Quillen Pharmacy in La Crosse, Wisconsin. And I think Quillen and Quillen's secretary were clearly involved. And if somebody's an FBI agent, anybody with an FBI agent out there? Could barely see. Nobody wants to admit it. But if somebody is an FBI agent, and of course they're responsible for leaks of classified information, then I'm willing to jump in and help you start an investigation as to where this came from and whose material is this. And what the manual says, it's a special operations, top secret, Majic Eyes Only, warning notice on every page. It was undeveloped Tri-X film. And my father created this replica of it. This little guy, $5. This is the premier coffee table piece. Every household needs to have this sort of on the table. Here, take a look at this. If you don't believe in UFOs, take a look at this. And I got them back there, $5. You know, you all need to have one. Actually, I'm running a special. You get the book and this together for $30. But having the manual, if you don't have one, handy and convenient all the time, you know, in amongst the magazines and so forth, right at your greeting area, you need to have that. Again, the key purpose here is to keep the ET remains secret. It describes that there's discs, cigars, triangles, basically a couple of types of EBEs. Security is of massive importance, keep everybody in the dark. It gives crating and uncrating instructions. It has a unidentified object, UFOB reporting guide. The references to the area are all genuine at the time. So this is sort of a picture of the page with the fingers in there. Type 1 and Type 2 descriptions of ABEs. Look oriental. This is not your typical gray, 80 to 100 pounds. Larger, more rounded. Chalky yellow, thick, slightly pebbled facial complexion. Sort of a rendering. Type 2, the typical gray, 3 to 5, 25 to 50 pounds, head proportional, larger. Sort of the gray look. One of the reasons why I think it's so real and authentic is this authenticity zinger, the raised Z. We went to Robert McCarter, a retired U.S. government printing office expert, wrote the style manual for the 1956, I think, style manual at the printing office. And we showed him the original photographs, and we said, what do you think? And he sort of looked at it and said, I think it could be real. Why is that? Well, the Z's are raised. Well, what's that about? And the hot lead printing press gets fuzz on it, and the Z's come off the line, and that was the big problem with the linotype, or actually the monotype modern printing press. Well, what else can you tell me about it? Well, the capitalization. There's a lot of capitalization in here. They didn't follow the standard US GPO's printing style manual. I think they followed the CIA's printing style manual. This is the level of sophistication that the guy knows whose style manual it is and basically could peg it. And I found the whole process very interesting and credible. The main concerns that have been voiced about the authenticity of it, where's the document control page? We found it. There's initials in there. I'm researching whose initials they are, JRT and EWL. I've been to a couple of JRT houses, but it wasn't the right one. Satellites not flown to 57, and it mentions down satellite as an effective alternative to keeping the public in the dark. But when you think about 54, von Braun had been on TV about satellites, and the satellite thing was a very credible cover story at the time. Area 51 didn't exist in 54 when it in fact did exist in 1951. We got newspaper articles and construction work that was going on. And it was only because of a book that was mentioned that said it didn't start until 55 that created the problem. There's language subtleties, like first aid is now first aid. The capitalization is different. Screwdriver is 2 words, and now it's 1 word due to the popularity of the cocktail. Craft tape, which is popular back then, is now called duct tape today. So there's a bunch of little zingers. I can give a whole hour-long talk just on this manual and why we think it's real and what it says and so forth. But I wanted to give you some, a quick review of it. Some of the crash cases. This is the table of contents. More cell phone. I hope it isn't my cell phone. This is the table of contents. It is virtually impossible to read it all. It's actually easier to read up there. But it starts in 1897 and goes through a lot of different crashes. Murray Island, the plains of St. Augustine, Kiev, Aztec, Sierra Madre, Del Rio, Texas in 1950, Edwards Air Force Base in California, Pittsburgh, Norway, Silver Spring, Maryland, New Mexico, Kingman, Arizona, Linda Howe's talk at the last crash conference on the Desert Range Experimental Station in 1953, Fort Polk, Louisiana, one by Clifford Stone in Pine Gap, Oregon, and it just, there's a lot. There's a lot to choose from. And again, they do vary in quality and sophistication. In some cases, you're going to read a paragraph. In other cases, you're going to read 15 pages. So you get a real good cross-section of things. If you're motivated and want to investigate one of them, let me know, and I'll tell you everything I know and how to investigate crashes. Actually, that could be another whole talk on what do you do to investigate crashes. Sources and methods. Cape Girardeau, I'll give you a quick tour about this. Cape Girardeau is along the Mississippi, and the short history of the Cape Girardeau incident is that it happened in April of '54, or April of '41. Reverend Huffman is called to this site from his house in downtown Main Street to offer blessings to 3 dead aliens, 2 together, 1 separated apart. FBI sweeps up the area, swears everybody's secrecy. Charlotte, his granddaughter, hears about the story with bits and pieces throughout her life, but when her grandmother was dying, Flo Huffman, she pressed her over 3 days. This is important to me. I want to understand what really happened here. Tell me the truth. Tell me what went on. And she was originally reluctant to do it. You know, your grandfather said we're not to talk about it, and so forth. But eventually, she prevailed, and you get the deathbed confession of Flo Huffman, all about this crash, supporting Charlotte's sort of bits and pieces of memory. And it's all very interesting. He was the minister at the Red Star Baptist Church. He got a picture of an alien given by a friend, and that went off to another friend and disappeared. It's not the one you can find on the web with an alien and 2 police officers holding it up, but that's really what it was about. So that's unfortunate, but that's sort of the way it is. Charlotte is the granddaughter and remembers this confession, remembers the picture of the alien. There's actually a wonderful reenactment and discussion of her testimony and details in the documentary called The Secret, which was aired on Sci-Fi Channel that my father and I produced. We'll have that at the table back there that you can buy that as well. I'll get a video clip in there next time so people can just watch 2 minutes of video and get a sense of it. The El Indio Guerrero cache was mentioned in the Eisenhower briefing document, December 6, 1950. Here you have a document. You've got one firsthand witness testimony, Willingham, that flew to the site and recovered debris, turned it into the Navy, and it disappeared. And then we have White House switchboard records that show that there was intense interest on this morning in Washington, D.C. as the UFO came over from like Greenland all the way down to Del Rio, Texas, and crashed, and what was going on. So that's sort of, I think that's given not neutral results, but one up, the 60 to 80% confidence level, because you got a document, you got a witness, you got a couple witnesses actually, and you got some other documents that are corroborating from the White House phone records. These are the phone records. They're difficult to read, but you know, from 10 a.m. to 1:15, there are 23 calls, and this is highly anonymous. But what's interesting is, you know, who called who precisely. You just, looking at these records, it's fun to imagine that the secretary with the thing, you know, this is going like this, and type in general, call this other general, connect. They kept this whole log, the whole year. Actually, they kept it for multiple years. At the Truman Presidential Library, you can go there and just look at the logs. Here's another potential crash retrieval right out of the National Archives. You have this document. You don't know what the blacked out message says, but in the body of the text it says 2 of the discs were alleged to have crashed, one in the lake and one on the opposite side of the shore in the wooded area. So you have a very interesting, there's no debate about the authenticity of this document or the source material or the report. The only debate is, you know, is it still there? Who got it? What's the deal? And this is where people can start digging in and looking for it. So if you're interested in crashes, find the lake, find the aerial photography, find all the residents in the local area, see if you can find any newspaper articles at the time, and then keep going after more leads. Hire a psychic, hire a dowser, keep generating more leads and analyzing. I mean, not that you believe the psychic or the dowser, but you start with their data and say, well, let's go from there. So that's a quick tutorial on some of the methods that I use. Here's an unknown missile in Mexico. Failed so far to be a V2, GAPA, or other type of guided missile. Careful check of USAF Ordnance Navy indicates no missiles fired from Alamogordo's Special Range or White Sands. Record Group 341. That's in the National Archives, United States Air Force. Entry 174, box 146, classified secret. So you can find it again if you go to the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, and fill out the forms and get a card and so forth, and that's where it is. And carbon, this is the only sort of document there. But it's signed by a guy who really knows his stuff and says it's clearly not one of ours. And so it's a very credible, interesting starting point, but it's not very clear, you know, where in Mexico and so forth. It would take a lot more digging to potentially correlate this and push the needle more towards authenticity rather than neutral. This would be a neutral case. Santa Cruz, Bolivia. 2 pages forwarded to the State Department by the CIA detail a crash of an unidentified object in Bolivia territory in May of '78, reportedly 4 meters in diameter, sort of ovoid shape. U.S. military officers at the site have been interviewed and confirmed extraterrestrial origin. So this is actually one up the 60 to 80% confidence level. And it's, you know, there's no debate about the document. The witnesses will tell you what they saw and what they did, and then they took it away. They took it to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and gave it to them. And they primarily picked up space junk, but it happened that this time it wasn't space junk, it was ET junk. And so they did what they do. So here's another wonderful, highly credible case. You write a whole book about this. Go to the site, take pictures, prove it, move the needle further on. Somalia, January of '96. Again, CIA and the State Department. These came from declassification documents from the State Department. The State Department has got the loosest declassification rules at the National Archives. Everybody, the CIA is just such a royal pain in the butt. The State Department, apparently, they have sort of standing guidelines there, and you can get it upstairs and get it to a reviewer and have them deal with it in like 3 to 6 months. Rather than the CIA, you generally got to wait a couple of years to get it done. So it's very interesting. Explosion attributed to UFOs. Document states the physical and mental health of both animals and people in the region have been adversely affected by whatever exploded. What would affect the mental health of people? You know, I suppose that just the trauma of the event, but Maybe it's more. Symptoms include dementia, skin rashes, boils on the skin, aching stomachs, and shedding skin. Those seem to be beyond radiation poisoning. So it's a fascinating, we've got physical evidence. This is another one. Fire up your passport. Head to Somalia. Take a translator. And try to find where this occurred. Interview some of the local people there. This is what needs to be done. I mean, so if you're interested in an adventure, here's one for you. Here's some leaked photos. Let me talk about some of those. At the top is the LA air raid, which Linda Howe had a much bigger picture of last night and saw. Now to the right of that is a picture of the Trinity burst site. The first one on the left is one from the Whittier College archives in 1949, and the one from the right is a leaked one. And I'll draw your attention, although it's very small, to the sort of white space in the right-hand photograph at the upper top, below the main burst, the black burst area. That is the exact coordinates that are specified in the IPU document that's the crash site for LZ2. And those concentric rings around there, either security perimeters, but more likely this is where they scooped up all the dirt and did a biological perimeter. What you discover when looking at some of these early biological and chemical weapons testing that was done at Fort Detrick is that they'd have a burst, and then they would have data collection in these concentric rings around, and they would scrape up all the dirt and analyze the drift patterns and how much poison did we get over here and over here. And so they looked at that. And we know that several of the Sandia Engineering District technicians died of profuse bleeding from the nose and mouth that Linda Howe mentioned in her talk last night. And they knew they had an alien contamination there, so that they adopted similar methodologies. Now that's all speculation on my part. It may simply be where the security guards drove their trucks, but that's my best theory right now. The big photograph in the bottom, White Sands Proving Grounds, July 4th, 47. Those annotations are not mine. Those are the annotations of Thomas Cantwheel or the leaker. I mean, I have a whole stack of photographs of about 100 or so that all have to do, allegedly, with UFOs. And they have these annotations. Some say MJ12 on them, and they're pictures of people. One that I talked about recently was Area 29 in the northwest corner of White Sands Proving Games. How many people ever heard of Area 29? One. There we go. A couple more. Okay. That's good. That's good. Well, 2 or 3 years from now, I think you'll hear a lot about Area 29. Area 29 is the new Area 51. I mean, it's not that it's new, but it's another one. And they're still doing lots of underground activity and testing, and they have multiple bases. So it's another ET-focused research and development area for the government. And then most compelling, which I'll show you a bigger blow-up is on the lower right, is the cross-section of an alleged crashed saucer. Now, it's grainy, and I apologize for that. It's not me. The original photograph was taken of a TV screen. And so I scanned it at much higher resolution and reproduced it as cleanly and perfectly as I could in the book and here. But I don't know. It looks weird. It's hard to tell precisely what it is, but allegedly that's a cross-section of a ET spacecraft. There's some other photographs, the upper left, where you see sort of a shoe-shaped craft or you know, with people, you could probably make out some people standing around, but that's a crash. A picture of the Scientific Advisory Board of the Air Force in 1947, labeled all MJ-12, and then Truman and an unidentified Air Force officer in that other picture. Somebody motivated and excited about we could go to the Truman Presidential Library and spend a couple of days looking through all the photographs we can find of Truman and try to find out who this guy is. And then find his children and keep digging and try to find out what the linkage is between him and others. So there's no lack of opportunity to investigate. Here's the Air Force Scientific Advisory Board with Theodore von Karman at the head of the table, Dietlif Bronk to the left, and allegedly all these people are MJ-12. I'm sure that my father knew Bill Sears, which is the first guy on the lower right, and his opinion is that Sears wasn't briefed on the truth. But others would be, and many of them. So, have any private investigators out there? No, nobody wants to admit they're a private investigator. That's what I need. I need a whole phalanx of private investigators. I want their names, their addresses, their children. I want to interview them. I want to find out what's going on. They'll all be fascinated to hear what their father or grandfather did as one of the great guiding lights, so to speak, or responsible persons for this great alien secret back then, which I think is ridiculous to keep secret today, although maybe not really. It's a mixed bag. If you thought 9/11 was bad, telling the truth about the ETs would make it look like child's play. This is another blow up of the sort of wreckage section. More photographs, these are all in the book. Paperclip MJ-12 in the lower corner. Von Braun's team right out of Nazi Germany. Many of them convicted of war crimes and atrocities. Linda Hunt's book, Secret Agenda, a rare book. You can Google it on Amazon and pay $350 to get a copy. But it details all the linkages of paperclip and Nazi scientists that were convicted of all sorts of serious crimes or were responsible for them and got into the U.S. for free because they were part of the super secret program. And this shoe craft, sort of in the middle, is a much bigger drawing by Thomas Cantwell, supposedly 100 feet long, that is what really crashed at Roswell. It wasn't the typical disc. It was this more of an aerodyne, shoe-like structure. One of the things that's fascinating about these documents and Thomas Cantwell is sort of people ask the question, well, why Tim Cooper, really? Why did Tim Cooper get this stuff in Big Bear Lake? Just pick this random guy out of nowhere. And the short answer is that his father, Harry B. Cooper, was doing all sorts of printing work and got accommodations and awards, which I'll show you, all having to do with this, and was plugged into the program big time. And his friends, I'm sure, knew all about it and came over for hot dogs and barbecues and so forth and remembered young Tim. And there was probably some connection later in life that, I'm going to give it to Tim Cooper's son. This is an accommodation from the National Personnel Record Center to Harry B. Cooper. Exemplary knowledge of film processing and printing techniques, working for the Foreign Technology Division and the National Photographic Interpretation Center in their contribution to the USAF UFO program. So there it is, real clear as day. This isn't Blue Book or anything like that. This is the UFO program, United States Air Force UFO program. You FOIA that keyword and you don't get anything. But here you have it in an accommodation signed by Curtis LeMay. Now even this document is kind of interesting because some skeptics said, well, they misspelled Curtis. Oh my God, it's got to be a fake. And when you Google both names, you discover that he's done it both ways in different documents. There's a huge, both spellings are right. So it is authentic, besides being original paper and ink and all that other stuff. And then a little bit about the Byrne memo. The Byrne memo is a top secret MJ-12, not Majic, but MJ-12, allegedly from Director Dulles. It sets up a series of 8 directives concerning the government's handling of the UFO problem, which is considered a national security threat. And it's still considered a national security threat to this day, which is logical and believable. But apparently when you say national security threat, you get compartmentalized and sidebarred, and they somehow deal with you differently if you have a military or government job or political job. You know, it's on original onion skin, watermarked, numerous authenticating markers, 9 different never-seen code words. It's very rich in potential. The provenance, it came with this sort of cover letter saying, this was mailed in June of '99 to Tim Cooper, and the source that mailed this, source S1, because of the -1 in the lower left-hand corner of the document, claims he worked with James Jesus Angleton from '60 to '74, who was the head of the CIA counterintelligence. And of course, you got to realize that counterintelligence means that's what the Soviet spies are trying to get from you. And they're trying to, you know, spy on the spies. And what would be the thing that would be most important to the KGB? It's the ET hardware. It's the ET bodies. It's all the super advanced, super national security secrets. I don't think they would really care about the latest design of a destroyer. I think they would be really excited about pieces of metal from an alien craft, because they could really get a big leapfrog ahead. So there's many, I would say probably, I'm speculating, 30% of all the spies were tasked with getting into Los Alamos, getting into Area 51, getting inside of these agencies to try to get the ET hardware. And this is why Angleton would have been aware of the problem. Despite being sort of a curmudgeon and with poor respect inside the CIA. So, you know, he did not get good performance reviews. He wore top hats and tails to work, and he was a weird character. But he was, to some degree, effective. And he claims he literally snatched these directives from the fire, hence the term burned memos. I sort of just discussed this. I guess what's significant is Nixon's special classified executive order ordered all MJ-12 documentation purged and destroyed. This one was not. And I think there are many other documents that are not destroyed and that are still in the National Archives. One of the things that you discover in dealing with the National Archives is the vastness of it. And it's just like in Raiders of the Lost Ark at the end. It's just a huge government file. Football fields after football fields of documents that crank over in roller boxes. It's massive, it's mind-boggling. You end up becoming a librarian to deal with all this paper and evidence. And they have all sorts of material, but they don't know where it is. You even talk to the archivists that have been there 30 years and say, well, I want this. Well, I think it could be over here. You look through 30 boxes and come back to me. Literally, that's what they do. Some have been in it and looked at it. So this is their the good part and the bad part. The good part is it's all under lock and key. There's probably tons of evidence there in the top secret classified vault, 631 room, or some of the other rooms, but they don't know where it is. And so this is where I'm having some excitement. I've got multiple dowsers dowsing the floor maps. And then you can pull out the records and go through the 30 or 40 boxes. They will never know. They won't even know to withhold it. And so it's going to be interesting. And if you really wanted to create an exopolitical stir and create disclosure overnight, is to pull 500 pages about ETs out of our National Archives. And then they would have a lot of explaining to do. And they don't even know where it is. They can't find it themselves. They can't come in and close it down. They could close it all down. I suppose they could do that and try to find it all. But I don't think they will. So it's an interesting, it was not all purged and destroyed. I think it's still out there. It's still out there in the form of witnesses and files scattered around the country, as well as in our National Archives. But the Byrne memo, the quick content is, it's got this 9-page directive. And noteworthy is this comment that Lancer, which is the code word for JFK, is making inquiries that we cannot allow. Cannot allow in a top secret memo. What does that mean when you write a document to say you cannot allow Lancer to gain access to this material? Does that mean you want to kill him? You know, there's enough reasons to kill Kennedy. Here's another one. This is the document. It's kind of an interesting thing. It's a basic business memo where it says we have a bunch of overlap and duplication in our various programs, and we need to consolidate and simplify our programs so that we can be more effective. And so what I want to do is combine a bunch of programs, and these are the new directives, or it's a draft directive set about what to do. And from that point of view, it's very believable. It's just that it's talking about classified materials and the ET problem. The civilian members were outside the loop. It's just to MJ 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. These were the tabs. President's Eyes Only, Need to Know, DOD 5200.1, which is the security classification process. It's still the same DOD number today. Project Blue Book, Freedom of Information. Notice it doesn't say Freedom of Information Act. If it did, then it would be an anachronism, then it would be a problem, then this would probably be bogus. But it doesn't say that. It just says how to deal with, respectable people's requests for information. Some general comes in and says, I want to know what's going on. PSYOP, biological warfare, and project environment. This is the directive. In the unlikely event that subject to unidentified flying objects or unconventional aerial weapons, another key Freedom of Information Act term, unconventional aerial weapons, becomes the subject of matter discussion with the chief executive, the president, or the National Security Council staff, department heads, joint chiefs, or foreign representatives, a clarification is in order to ascertain the reasons for bringing up the subject. Under no circumstances should a member of MJ-12 suggest or infer that the subject is classified as a national security threat. So they don't even want to talk to their own national security staff in 63 or 62 about the importance of this. It's above that. It's outside that. It's probably still outside that today. Does Condi know the truth? Probably. Does Cheney know the truth? Yeah, probably. Rumsfeld? Yeah, probably. Does Bush? I don't think he knows the whole truth. Does his father know the whole truth? Well, probably. Does Clinton know anything? I don't think so. So it's very tricky. It's a hall of mirrors. This is the original document that sort of says that with the top secret MJ-12. The need to know. In order to facilitate the cooperation with the current activities of the group, effective immediately, a need to know should be granted to the director of the FBI for maintenance of security until such time as the FBI involvement is no longer needed. So Hoover gets, in 62, 63, access, and his people get some exposure. And so the question is, it's very difficult to the names of FBI agents. Actually, you can't do it. You can't even do it historically very well unless you're a big public figure. So you probably could get the top 20 guys around Hoover, get their names and find their children, but finding the actual agents' names, the FBI won't give that to you. So it's a difficult investigation channel. Regarding Project Blue Book, National Security Intelligence or National Intelligence Estimates states the Blue Book as a counterintelligence functions. Blue Book is for public and congressional inquiry. So they've identified Blue Book as clearly the front cover story, and everything important is pulled away from it. And the last sort of letter that's reproduced in the book, and a tribute to this man who had a lot of courage to give Tim Cooper these documents and files from his personal treasure trove and try to gain some peace in his dying life for all the dastardly things that he did. I'm sure he probably killed dozens of people and did some, terrible things, and he just thought it was time that this nonsense end for the sake of the government and for himself and so forth. So he writes this long letter to Tim Cooper, which is reproduced in the book. So the sort of summary things, the key reasons to read the book. You got a synthesis of every crash retrieval event. You got the sources of the Majestic documents and emphasis on Psalm 101. You got a good expose on how stupid SETI is. You should read that, memorize it, and bring it up to your friends all the time. You got fresh, never before seen information in terms of photographs and crashes and so forth. And I defy any reasonable reader to get through this and be in denial that it hasn't crashed and we don't have it and we aren't exploiting it and it isn't extremely important. And then there's all the various quotes here. Linda Howe, most readers will be surprised that UFO crashes and retrievals were discussed in official government memos as far back as President FDR and in the early 40s. Some of the first documents we talk about, first crashes in the LA air raid and so forth. Linda went through them last night. This important book presses against the American government's UFO secrecy lid like steam rising in a pressure cooker. How many more droplets will it take to burst the lid off? I know she's being rhetorical and fancy there, but I think it's going to take a lot more droplets. And when I get done with 100 crashes in 3 or 4 years and a bunch more crashed hardware, I don't think it's going to be enough. And that's the challenge, is that it's going to take more than that. It's going to take a lot of crashes and witnesses, and you're going to have to beat the media down over years. This is one of the strategic missions of MUFON in my mind. Andrew Cerrone wrote this great book called Meridian. It's a wonderful non-fiction or fiction read. Guy lives down in Colorado Springs. And we used to work at the, in my opinion, Air Force Office of Special Investigations. It's no accident of human invention that quantum leaps in technologies involving metal, carbon, low observable alloys, and propulsion systems, pulse detonation engines, have occurred in such contracted period of time. To believe so would be the stuff of fairy tales they're made of, or more likely the tip of the cover-up iceberg, the scale of complexity of which is unprecedented in history. Hopefully Majic Eyes Only will be the icebreaker vessel which eventually frees the logjam of truth. That's a lot of weight, but this is a serious, what he's talking about is the secrecy apparatus. It's so vast. I was at a cocktail party. Actually, no, let's strike that. I was at my daughter's 3-year-old birthday party. That's much better. It's more, you know. And I was talking to the people that were there, and yeah, I used to work in the Air Force. Oh, really? Well, yeah, I went to the Air Force Academy, and his wife went to the Air Force and did stuff. And I said, well, did you ever, you know, like go to Area 51 or Nellis Air Force Base? Yeah, I was into Nellis Air Force Base, and I had a few friends that worked at Area 51. And well, you know, what was it like? He said, well, you know, I really didn't want to do that. They had a very nasty situation. They would go to Nellis, they'd hop a plane and fly into Area 51, and they would either be housed in Nellis or housed at Area 51. And every 2 weeks, mind you, you take a full lie detector test. You're videotaped and monitored all the time. And you're psychologically screened before you can even go to keep your mouth shut, independent of your skill set, typically. So you imagine that you're getting professional, rigorous lie detector tests every 2 weeks. You're videotaped and monitored all the time. You live in a controlled housing environment, and you're working on ET stuff. And you won't keep your mouth shut? Come on, you will. You really will. And this is the challenge for the modern people, is that they, you know, pensions and wives and lives, and they open their mouth, they go to a place worse than Leavenworth. It's only the people that have been back in history that they can't really do anything to. They don't have the non-disclosure oaths. They don't have the, they don't care anymore. You take me to jail, I'm 91, I'm dying of cancer, buzz off. You know, and that's the sort of thing that you can remember. So you have to think about how serious, deadly serious the secrecy apparatus is, with massive amounts of money and smart people. Stan Friedman had a great quote about the material. Even if only a small fraction of these cases are real, the implications for history of mankind are profound. Rich Dolan, the implications of this are enormous. Ryan Wood has prepared the best compilation and analysis of UFO crash retrievals to date. His work will stand as a valuable resource for future generations of researchers in the topic, and anyone who wants to glimpse into the unseemly underbelly of the U.S. national security establishment. And there are many more quotes on my website, magiceyesonly.com, where you can buy the book, you can get it on Amazon, and you know, Ed Mitchell and John Schuessler and Paul Davids and Bassett and Stephen Greer, Stan Gordon and Richard Haynes and Bruce Maccabee, Mars. My father was the easiest quote. You just said, Dad, I need a quote. But there's and I'm working on more. But suffice it to say that I haven't found anybody that had any substantial issue or problem with supporting this sort of meta-analysis of UFO crashes. And they all think it's important and relevant. And this is just the beginning. You could do the same thing with witnesses. Linda Howe's presentation last night, where he had that witness, Sherwin, I think was his name. How many people saw that? Yeah, most of the audience. I mean, that's a wonderful, first-hand, highly credible witness. And there's at least 50 of those, I think, in various aspects. You could do a whole book about witnesses and the quality of the witnesses. So I would, that would be a good new step. I'm not going to go there, but somebody else may. And this is really the 4th crash conference is coming up at the Tuscany in Las Vegas. We typically have as many people as here at MUFON, 200, 300 people. And it's a really nice hotel. The talks are shorter. We only typically do 50 minutes with 5 minutes of Q&A, forced Q&A. I have 3 minutes remaining. I'll try to get 1 or 2 questions, so if you start thinking about that, we can get them in there. And then I'm going to move to the back of the room where I'll sign some books and talk to people. But this is what's coming up. We got 2 new book introductions. Rich Dolan will have his volume 2 of UFO in the National Security State up till present. Defying Gravity, the Parallel Universe of T. Townsend Brown by Paul Shatskin. He's written a couple other big heavyweight biographies, but I'm fascinated to hear about what he's learned about UFOs and anti-gravity and free energy in the UFO field. We have 4 new crashes that are going to be covered for the first time at the conference. Alien viruses and biowarfare. My father and Nick Redfern are going to do like an hour-and-a-half thing about expanding on what Linda closed with last night about alien viruses. I mean, you saw that right there. The great threat is the alien virus. And so we're going to keep going. There's a lot more information about that. Linda Howe's going to give a talk on updates on the US ET conflict and her dress crash retrieval site. Another wonderful presentation is going to be from Michael Lindemann on scenarios of contact, a result of the Joe Firmage work done in 2000, where they had a couple people, well, I had like 20 people for the weekend, generals, press, scientists, all talking about what happens to society if you disclose something credible. And then they did it again, and he was the moderator and facilitator. So that's going to be really fun. And with that, I guess I'll take 1 question, because I have 1 minute remaining, and then go to the back. Yes. Mr. Tom.
Yes. Hi. Is it working? Okay.
Yeah.
I meant to ask this of Linda Howe last night, but I'll go ahead and ask you, Ryan. In the 1940s period, she was basically making claims that there were UFOs that could pace our missiles and rockets with impunity. And yet we were supposedly shooting them down with old anti-aircraft guns. That seems like a contradiction to me.
Yeah, it does. It does seem like a little bit of a contradiction. But they had proximity fuses then too, so you get some flack. There's better evidence in my mind for radar interrupting the stability of UFOs, testimony of Corso, and the Roswell event, than anti-aircraft fire. But I'm sure that they improve their technologies all the time. It does seem a bit much, but it could work. You just don't know. So with that, I thank you all, and I will be back in the talking.